Okay, in our risk management process, we said we're going to identify risks, assess risks, and control risks. And this video clip looks at ways of identifying risk on your project. We don't know what we don't know, that's the issue. And how do you find out what you don't know you don't know? We must identify the risks and find out what might go wrong. And if we don't identify it, we can't assess it. And if we don't assess it, we can't control it. But where do you stop? Where do you say, I've spent enough time trying to identify risks? And we all know that when your project goes wrong, it's because of a risk that you didn't identify. Here's a list of ways of identifying risk on projects. Perhaps the simplest one is common sense. If something bad has happened to you in the past, you will do things to prevent it happening. And when you're looking at your next project, you'll go, oh yes, I'm not going to do it that way again because it's too risky. If you've missed an aeroplane flight, you're probably always leaving for the airport 15 minutes early these days. A strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats analysis, a SWOT analysis, is a good idea on the project. Good for two reasons, because it will identify the risks, which are the weaknesses, the threats. It will identify the good risks, the chances, the opportunities, and the strengths. So we're looking at both the positive and the negative when you do a SWOT analysis. You could do some what-if modeling. We've already suggested in the financial analysis that you need to do some sensitivity analysis. What if the oil price increases? Or what if the exchange rate changes? What if our sales decrease by 10%? You could use your computer models, your spreadsheets, to model this to find out what happens. So what if the duration of some of your tasks increases? We now have the plans. We can look at our project management plans and say, what if that cost increases, and look at the effect on the budget, the cost account? What if that duration doubles? Does it change the critical path? So we can do the what if analysis. It's not just your common sense, it's your team's common sense. Get them together and brainstorm what could go wrong on the project. Spend some time just looking at your project plan and getting the team experience and the company's experience to brainstorm the risks. And looking at the project plan is a great way of identifying risks. We'll look at that in the next slide. Or following some checklists. If your project is a runner, repeater type project, the things you're doing are the same. You can follow checklists to identify risks. So look at the project plan to help you identify risks. We've got a project specification. We've got a work breakdown structure. Look at every task on the work breakdown structure and say, what could happen to this task? What could go wrong? We're going to be looking at skills matrices eventually, but we have assigned the tasks to different people in our organization. Do they have the correct skills? A lack of skills could lead to a source of risk on your project. Look at the cost account. Where is the main costs? Where are the main costs? Which task is the costlier? That's going to be risky. Or which resource is using the most money? That is risky. Look at your critical path analysis. The things on the critical path, are they risky? Because we really don't want risky tasks on the critical path. Can we move them away from the critical path in some way? The second thing to look at there would be the tasks with a very small amount of float. They're very close to becoming critical. Are they risky? We need to have a look. Have a look at your resource analysis. Which machines in your factory tend to break down most? It's a risk on your project. Which resources tend to go off sick or are unreliable? And which resources are over capacity or very nearly at capacity? So identifying risk from the project plans is one method. Or we could follow some checklists. Checklists can be categorized by in-house risks, contractor risks, customer risks, third-party risks. And here's some examples of them. If your project is a runner-repeater project, then following a checklist is ideal. Of course, if your project involves many new tasks, you won't have done them before, you can't have put them on a checklist. But in-house errors like estimating errors or inadequate resources or communication problems, common sources of internal risks on projects. Or risks at your contractors, that they can't fulfill the technical requirements, or the contractor doesn't have enough resources, or the contractor goes out of business, or there's some form of industrial dispute preventing you from accessing the products that the contractor is doing. The customer could be a source of risks. They could decide to cancel this project in some way, leaving you high and dry, or they could not pay or fail to pay, delay pay. Customer could go out of business. There's a risk for your work. Or the customer would not approve your project at key steps, or not attend, not communicate with you. Big risks on the project. Finally, third-party risks, risks that don't fall into one of those three categories. Oil price changes, theft, acts of God, extreme bad weather, legislation changes that couldn't be seen. You can only use checklists to identify your risks if it's a runner-repeater type project. So where do we put all of these risks that we've identified? We need to keep them in a risk register or a risk log. Every risk we've identified, put it in a risk log. If this is some sort of database or spreadsheet, it means that we can sort it, and that might be useful when we assess the risks. So your risk log is used at every project meeting, where you'll discuss any new risks or have the assessment of the risks that you've identified being changed. And sometimes a risk is triggered, it happens, and sometimes it doesn't. So a risk for me in any lecture is that the computer doesn't work. But as soon as I start the lecture and the computer is working, that risk disappears. It's gone, it's not been triggered, and I could ignore it. So there are many ways of identifying risks, and we can't assess them or control them if we don't identify them. So we must identify the risks on our projects.